Hey, what's going on, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be giving you a first run review of the Nike Vomero Plus. But before we get into that, a little bit about my stats. I'm 5'11". I weigh anywhere between 195 and 200 pounds. My daily miles are anywhere between an 8:15 to 8:45, and my tempo and threshold paces are anywhere between 6 minutes to 7 minutes. And my current marathon PR is a 3:28 marathon that I did earlier this year in Austin, Texas. But without further ado, I do want to talk about a couple of other preferences before I get into the actual shoe review itself. So as a more traditionally bigger runner, some of my preferences include shoes that have more of that modern rocker geometry. You can think of something like what the Endorphin Speed was originally, right? When that first came to market, that was, I would say, the genesis of modern geometry running shoes. And that's just something that I've always enjoyed ever since stepping foot in those some odd 6 years ago. And then along with that, as a bigger runner and someone who has smaller joints, I do prefer shoes that are more stable neutral or general stability shoes. Stability shoes in 2026 are not that great from what I've heard so far. I do have the Hurricane 26 coming in, but that stable neutral category is really where my preferences are. So with that in mind, let's go into the actual shoes themselves, starting with the upper. So the upper of this shoe is a pretty robust upper. I mean, for the Nike Vomero Plus series, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be their version of a more upscaled or premium daily trainer. And if you've seen my review on the Saucony Triumph 24, I'm sure you're all aware of my thoughts on the premium daily trainer category as a whole. But when it comes to the upper here, it's pretty standard. It looks like it has a couple of layers. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm any kind of textile expert, but it is a nice, solid, breathable upper, I will say. I'm based out of Texas, and it's pretty humid right now. Other than today, I got caught in the downpour. But in general, it was still humid before it actually started raining. But solid breathability. The upper does have a good lockdown. I really like shoes that have, at least for daily trainer purposes, shoes that have this more robust heel counter. And I also like that because of the sidewalls here from the midsole, it actually, I feel, helps secure the ankle really well. So I don't really have any complaints of the upper, especially for its intended purpose. And I actually think it does things really well. Like, I like that it actually does have a pretty plush tongue. It has a solid lockdown. It has that lace lock mechanism for myself, which I prefer. I think most people will get along really well with this upper. And so for that, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, just because for a 9, it's going to be accommodating to a bunch of people. But now let's talk about the midsole. And the midsole is the biggest thing when it comes, and the point of contention with me when it comes to these premium daily trainers, right? Is that, so for example, with the Saucony Triumph 24, I thought it was a step in the right direction. I think Saucony is moving in the right way with where they're thinking of taking their midsole foams and trying to upscale it beyond the Power on PB that they typically use. But I still think that that shoe did have some misses, and I think a lot of it had to do with the foam itself and then also the geometry. So one of the things that I got some really good feedback and perspective on from you in the comment section was around, well, for some of you runners, I still enjoy a more traditional running shoe geometry. And I think that's completely valid. Again, my preferences are just that, my preferences. And I understand that there is certainly a market for the more traditional running shoes, but I think there's a balance that has to be hit there. And I think that balance comes between maintaining that traditional geometry, but then also giving it some of the more modern technology applications. And so what I mean by that is that I think a lot of people have gotten really hung up on ATPU. I think it was the Mega Blast and maybe even the Pumas, although Puma doesn't really disclose what's in their running shoe foams. They just have that broad nitro labeling. But I'm pretty sure it was those shoes, the Asics and the Puma race shoes with the ATPUs and the Mega Blast, that really made that the focal point for so many running shoe brands. And I just don't think that that application is needed for every single shoe. And I think the traditional running shoe geometry category is exactly where I think that having a more, let's call it, it's a firmer foam, but it still has that modern energy return. And I'm pretty sure for Nike Zoom X in the Vomero Plus, it is a TPEE. I could be wrong. Please feel free to let me know down below. But what I really like about this foam and its application in this shoe and the way that the geometry of the midsole is shaped is that it still has that robustness to it. It still has that solid feel when I'm landing, but it still gives you that modern energy return as opposed to something like what was found in those more traditional EVA shoes. And I think that's where the problem with the Saucony Triumph was, because even though these have similar stats with a 10 millimeter drop, my forefoot did not feel like it was bottoming out in this shoe. This shoe was very solid at toe off and onward, and I really enjoyed that overall experience as opposed to something like what was in the Saucony Triumph. Again, I think, and actually looking into a little bit further, the Saucony Triumph 24, it's an ATPU blend. And I think that's where that whole democratized terminology came from, is that I think they actually blended that foam and essentially nerfed the energy return that would be in a traditional ATPU by, I'm assuming they put in some kind of EVA, or what are some of the other common lower tier foams, like olefin, I think is another one. But again, for its application, this midsole, I think, hits it out of the park. I've really enjoyed my experience in it thus far. So when we think of everything when it comes to the midsole, right, like, it doesn't have a traditional geometry, yes, but it still has some of that toe-off capability because it does have a little bit of that rocker up front. And I actually think that the heel transition is also very smooth because I heel strike heavy in my right foot. Left foot is more midfoot. So I think it's going to suit a lot of people really well. But one thing I do want to call out before giving my final score here is that, remember, shoes are tools. And for this tool specifically, and the reason why I picked it up, even though it's not typically in my range of preference, because it has that 10 millimeter drop, and I generally prefer a 6 to 8 millimeter drop, is I prefer to have that geometry in those more traditional shoes. But this, with its 10 millimeters, actually, and something that's been bothering me lately, is taking some pressure off of my Achilles and my calves. So again, this is why I have always said shoes are tools and you need to have the right tool for the job. And this shoe has done that swimmingly for my first runs in the shoe. And so with that being said, I'm going to go now into the overall value of the shoe. And so for the value of the shoe, the retail price is $108. And as always, when I'm thinking of the value, I'm always thinking of the range. What's the range of mileage? What's the range of paces? And what's the range of both of those mixed together? And I think for $180, for everything that this provides, that's a good offering. It's not the best, because I don't necessarily believe it's that super trainer. I would categorize this more as a max cushion shoe with range added to it. But that's if we're looking at it at the $180 price point. I got these shoes for $90 off of Hibbett because they were having a promotion, and which was another reason I picked it up. I mean, $90, 50% off, that's a steal. And that's something, when we go into the next section, I have to give kudos to Nike. But if you're paying, and this shoe you can very easily find on sale now. I think they have prices between $120 to $150 between Dick's Sporting Goods and Nike.com. I think that this shoe is a steal even on those more regular sales, we'll say. And so I'm going to have to say this shoe, as it stands right now, I'm going to have to give it a 9 out of 10 for its value. So it's going to be a 9 for the upper because I think it'll accommodate a lot of people. The midsole is going to be an 8 just because I believe that that 10 millimeter drop is going to be the rub for some people and that traditional rocker geometry. But even still, I think even for those people who have those preferences, because I am one of those people, I still think it has that application. So I can only give it an 8. But for the value, that's got to be a 9 out of 10. I mean, on sale, this shoe and its range and what I think it can do long term is going to be immensely valuable. And the reason why I can vouch for it, even for its speed capabilities, is because I cheated a little bit. I did 2 runs in this shoe. Because my coach wanted me to lower the volume the past couple of days because of some extensive leg fatigue. I had 2 miles with pickups yesterday, and then I had my 5-mile run today. For the pickups, it was 8 by 30 seconds, and I'll flash them up here. I believe I got down to 6:30 for some of those reps. And again, this is on legs that are supposed to be recovering right now. And the shoes just went really well. And actually my run yesterday, I think my average pace was around an 8:10. And then this morning it was around an 8:25. So again, I think it does have the speed capabilities beyond a typical daily trainer, and we'll have to see how it performs for a long run. So I might take this for my long run this weekend, or I might end up going for the Adidas Hyperboost Edge so I can give you a full review of that shoe. But either way, I'm very confident that this shoe is going to have the range when it comes to the mileage put into it in one run, just because of that more robust midsole foam. And so with that being said, let's go into the next section, which is the good, the bad, the ugly, the beauty. The good is Nike, for making a first iteration of a shoe, I think knocked it out of the park. This shoe has such good range on it right now, and with that value score, especially now that you can get it on sale, I think that this was one of Nike's best shoes that they've put out, by far. I can't even think of anything from the Nike Pegasus, like the Pegasus, the Premium, and the Plus. I don't think that range did very well, or was received very well. I did have a pair of the Pluses, and at my size, they just did not handle my weight well. But the Vomero series from Nike, I think they knocked it out of the park. So that's a good point, and shout out to Nike on that. The bad part, though, is the fact that I can't honestly think of one necessarily bad thing right now. Let me try to think for a second, and I might just speed up this section. The bad is, actually, now that I think about it, the bad is going to be that I do think, and I selfishly wish this for myself, I wish that Nike took the geometry of the Vomero Premium and put it in a shoe, in one of their more daily trainer shoes. I think that keeping that wide base and big rocker on the heel and the forefoot would do really well with a shoe like this, and not necessarily with a bigger stack. I would love to see if Nike actually tested their limits a bit more and didn't necessarily just go with a traditional geometry for the majority of their shoes. I think the Vomero Premium, if I'm not mistaken, is, well, I guess the Vomero 18 does as well, but because it does have more of that rocker. But even still, I think Nike does need to push it a little bit more with modernizing not only their foams, which I think they're doing a better job of, but also modernizing the geometry of their shoes as well. So now here comes the ugly. The ugly is, this is a 2025 shoe. We need to see what Nike does with the Vomero Plus too. But the ugly is also the beauty. Because it's a Nike shoe, they definitely made a ton of inventory, and there's going to be a ton of sale options for this shoe. So as much as I love this shoe, I would love to see where Nike goes with it in the future, and I'm pretty sure there's already some previews of it out there, or some samples, so only time will tell. But for a first run review, I think Nike's really knocked it out of the park. So with that being said, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you didn't or disagree, please let me know down below. I love having some back and forth dialogue. If you disagree, I enjoyed the disagreements because that actually will help give and change my perspective over time. And I think that's the value of doing these reviews. It's not just a one-way conversation. I want it to be something where we can talk back and forth and share differing opinions as well. So with that being said, guys, we'll talk soon. Have a nice day.